Very first show. Let's get started then. On this week's program, activities like protesting with demonstrators and their opponents. What is lasting power of attorney and what should its ethics be for having them? Is it legal or illegal for them to go to the and does it control business and organized
deviate from the right to protest if you do so in accordance with the law, and in doing so you're using a proportionate means to achieve a legitimate end. So it's not something that police or government can just say, yeah, we don't like that protest very much, shut down, go home. They have to think very carefully about it and say, do we have a legal power that's been recognised by Parliament, and are we going to use that power in a way that achieves our aim, but also impacts as little as possible on the right to protest. And one final word on the nature of this right is often two parts. Most people think the right to protest is just the right to be sort of to get on with it. But actually, the right to protest imposes a duty on the government to facilitate lawful protest. So the government doesn't just have to leave you alone to wave your placard, it has to keep you safe while doing so.
When we're trying to understand these things, words like proportionality, limitations, essentially the law of protest, a lot of people are going to argue that there has to be a balance between, yes, sure, right to protest, but also the right for ordinary people to go about their daily lives without disruption.
Well, that's the argument we hear a lot from the government. From a legal perspective, there isn't a right to go about your daily lives without disruption. That's not a human rights act, it's not in common law.
Take us through what laws are now limiting that right to protest.
Sure, well, if I took you through all of them, then we'd need a much longer program.
What are you giving me 19th century quotations? I believe that.
There are at least 27 different criminal offences you can potentially commit whilst engaged in a protest. But let's talk about the big picture. There's basically two central powers that the government has given itself in recent years, or expanded in recent years. One comes from a law called the Police Crime Sentencing Reforms Act. And the collection of powers in that essentially allows governments and the state, I should say, so in practice it's the police, to regulate protests. So to say, yes, a protest can or can't happen, how long it can happen for, where it can happen, and limitations on protests generally. Then the other sort of basket of powers comes from the Public Order Acts. There's one of them that we call the Public Order Acts, and these may impose specific offences, and these are offences that target particular protesters. So after Extinction Rebellion, there's an offence of looking on, changing yourself to something, so which would incidentally have led to a lot of suffragettes being, a lot more suffragettes being arrested than were actually arrested. But there's also the offence of going equipped for looking on. So if you're just carrying a bike or something in a way that looks like you could be using it for a protest.
That's confusing.
Well,
Intent to look on is now a little bit.
I mean, it's the police, I should say, that we're going to bring them in, have been very sensible about this in the way they've got about this. But we're talking about the potential scope of that is quite wide. So you've got things like offences of locking on, but also EU orders which limit particular protesters and say that if you cause serious disruption, then you may be prohibited from taking part in protests going on.
Let's talk to Andy, the College of Policing. So first off, what is the College of Policing?
So the role of the college is to share good practice and to set standards, essentially. And we've heard a lot about the complexity of the law, and it's absolutely right. The college's role is making sure there's consistency, because the risk where that complexity exists is that there's inconsistency across the country. Unfortunately, police forces might expect to see different policing, and of course the public, that's not what the public expects. So the role of the college is really clear, that we're here to set the standard and to help officers understand the law, to help them understand it in a way that's consistent across the country.
So who do you have one? I think depending on your estate really, depending on how complicated your affairs are, the more property that you have potentially, the more you might want to draft in a solicitor. You may want to consider having a more detailed document drafted by a professional as opposed to just drafting it yourself online. Some may be concerned that there could be an abuse of lasting power of attorney. Are there any safeguards involved in it at all? When you're signing your LPA, you do have to have a witness there who can A, clarify that you are of mental capacity, that you are of sound mental capacity. You can have more than one attorney as well, actually, so that you can have one governing the other. But yeah, your witness will be there to sign off on the document and make sure that there's nothing untoward, there's no duress, shall we say, going on. Can you take it back, or is it forever? You can take it back. If you still have mental capacity, you can apply for it to be ended, if you like. Obviously, if you're without capacity, you wouldn't be able to do that. So, if you're in a relationship, this definitely sounds like something you should discuss early. Not first date, not first date material, no, but absolutely, because when finances become joined and you have a joint bank account, let's say, for example, your spouse loses capacity, You, as the spouse, may not even be able to access the money that's yours. You may not be able to access that joint bank account, which means that you may not be able to pay the mortgage. It can be very inconvenient.
Thanks so much for that, Tracy. Now, is it legal or illegal to build on green belts? Campaigners in Greater Manchester are taking legal action after Barry Council announced plans to build 1,500 homes on greenbelt land. Malcolm Wagner and his wife live next door.
We're trying not to be NIMBYs. We realise that there are needs for property. Once this greenbelt built, it's gone forever. There's no coming back from it. And so to have that many houses takes our breath away, and we can't believe that it's being taken out from underneath us.
Barry Council says building on brownfield sites alone wouldn't fully address the area's lack of housing. And it's not just Greater Manchester. There are plans to build on greenbelt near Leeds, Sunderland and London. Why? Because of a chronic housing shortage right across England and the UK. Our expert witness, Dr. Sam Fowles, is still with us. He's a barrister specialising in public law. Sam, what is greenbelt?
The idea of greenbelt was to stop urban sprawl. So you had cities that were sort of getting bigger and bigger, and developers kind of want to build houses in the suburbs. And you get to the point where cities just sort of smash into each other. And it was decided that what we want to do is maintain our cities and our towns with their distinct identities and flavours, and we want countryside in between. So greenbelt is areas around cities and towns that you can't build on except in very special circumstances and can be designated as such by local councils.
Now, I realise for anyone living in cities, it can be very difficult to imagine the colour green, but let's all imagine the colour green here. That sounds like there's a lot of planning involved in it. So who decides any of these things?
The planning
A lot of
is, for me, one of our sort of greatest
green?
achievements as a country, because it's one of the relatively few areas where public decisions are really scrutinised at a forensic level, and local people get to have a significant say in that. So when you're making a planning decision, whether you want to build in the greenbelt or build somewhere else, you have to apply to the local council and planning commission. And then they go out and they ask lots and lots of people what their opinion on this is. And some of those are sort of experts, like environmental specialists, and some of them are just ordinary people. The council then makes a decision, yes or no, and they do that by applying their policy, and so they have to set out what their priorities are, and that in turn has been tested and considered and consulted upon, and they have to apply national policy which the government sets. Now, once the council has made the decision, you can challenge it, and if you are the developer, you can appeal to the Secretary of State, and actually what the Secretary of State will do will appoint an inspector to hear the appeal on their behalf, and the inspector convenes a planning inquiry in most cases. And this is where the developer, the council, local people can all come and make their case. They come and test the evidence. If someone is giving evidence that you disagree with, you can cross-examine them and really probe into what they're saying and the thinking and analysis behind that. And then the inspector will make a substantive decision again. Now, if either the council or the inspector get the law wrong, then local people or the developer can take them to court. And that's what we call a judicial review, which is where judges don't remake the decision. They don't mess around with the substance. They just say, have you got the law right? Have you applied the right law? And if you haven't, they say, well, go back home, get the law right, and take this decision again.
Many people would argue we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and looking at greenbelt plans is exactly how we're going to solve it. So what kind of housing duties are local councils under to solve this crisis?
So local councils already have housing duties, and these come into two parts, basically.
嗰個係
Is to make
Danny 媽咪嚟，佢坐喺嗰度做。
houses to be built, and councils have to have a 5-year supply of land to hit their housing targets. If they don't have that, then
你係咪會去 Danny 屋企㗎？
most cases that the housing will be built even if it's against the council's plan. On the other hand, councils have a duty to house residents.
咁你想佢過嚟啊，定係我哋過去啊？
Sometimes
It depends what
The issue with both of these things, though,
What his mum said.
we're having debates about building
佢媽咪講咩話？可以講佢或者過嚟就係佢講嘅。
So how it's supposed to
Oh, she haven't said anything yet.
There are over 1 million.
咁你自己想係想去佢屋企玩啊，定係想人哋嚟我哋屋企玩啊？
So the government
你自己想咧？佢屋企有咩 game 啊？係咪多過我哋啊？ 咁佢屋企係咪多啲 game 啊？哥哥？咁佢有冇？咁佢屋企有咩 game 啊？咪有咩 console 啊？佢屋企？ Desktop computer.
The same but a bit different.
Okay.
But I'm a big fan of the Scotland planning system because they have even more.
聽唔到你講咩？ 佢有冇其他 console 咧？PS5 啊，即係就係得 computer。咁你做咩同佢玩？
There it is, the Greenbelt, a success story for public involvement and public scrutiny. That's it for this week. Thanks so much to Sam, Andy, and Tracy for joining me for the check for my very first show. Remember, you can get in touch. Email thelawshow@bbc.co.uk or WhatsApp us on 0330 678 4770. See you next time.
Those contact details again. The Law Show at bbc.co.uk is the email address, and the number on WhatsApp is 0330 678 4770. Law Show will be back same time next week. It was produced by Ravi Knight, and the editor is Tara McDermott.
It's one of the world's most revered museums. In a rubbery.
Dun.
Going your way.
So I used to have a thing about walking into a place and putting my money in the like straight away as a crowd control.
Shooting it.
Yeah, and the people I was with hated it because you hadn't said anything on so I said it. I don't know if it was just a kind of buzz or a show off kind of thing, but I thought it was a really good way to control people. Well, it kind of says the message of the field. And I've got to say to you that I've had guns at my face, but I can't imagine it's like for a normal person to have a shotgun put in their face. It must be probably life changing. I think you look at certain crimes and you say, well, this is sometimes it's not the actual damage that's done after that. If you look at King John, you never see memorized rights against it. But you see that's not just said, it's 6 o'clock, I didn't know actually set my approach. They came and said, it was completely out of actually set my approach. When we get that, see that work, get out of the scam. Right. That's what we learned to do. I'm confident up until my ticket out, this is my golden ticket.
How soon was it? Realise that's not black and white. This is not the ticket.
Yeah, I think what we can depends on my time.
3點嘅。
Start.
做咩？
The first day I was
What?
there, do a van.
乜嘢？
But actually, firstly,
我芬特嚟，我哋唔去，
and it was
唔去咩？唔係咩？
firstly,
又危險又貴。
they moved to the next one. And I was like, it took a
It's very dangerous.
before I went
I don't like it.
and stopped me. I didn't. What he just bloody said.
But if
And I was like,
either one of us
"Get
gets
down,
killed,
can't do that.
Mummy or you,
I'll keep just scrub
still
my
gets
head out of that.
can't still get killed.
Because you've got that high
Come on.
road,
同埋嗰個乜貴嗰個 Build 我都唔係好中意，好危險。我記得上次你玩嗰個上落去，即係佔住個屁股咧，跟住之後上嗰個 slide 落嚟咧，佢都冇等啲人走咗就叫啲人落去，跟住你俾人踢到啊，記唔記得？嚇
all my years, my younger
？You don't remember?
I just remember going to kayak.
Kayak.
white wall
I also remember.
Kayak 唔係喺呢個咩喎
No, like the boat. Like
The
the
boat.
boat.
Okay.
I also remember going to the play area.
Everything that kind of happened
The
to
map?
me came
I
back
also
up.
remember
The
going to
officer
the
said,
play
you'll
area.
find me.
Anything
You'll
else I
find me.
remember.
There must have been a
係啊，跟住你嗰次係咁玩個 zip line 啊嘛，
Oh yeah, zip
time
line
for
is very
a
fun.
reason.
係啊，但係你依家出邊都有 zip line 你都唔係成日玩。
Harm the people in a variety of ways and how the hierarchy that. But
So, the first couple of weeks, me and Paul, my blagging it, to go there and blag it, I don't need to train.
I'm different.
I'm different. I'm better. I'm better than these people. I was thinking, like, I ain't true, like, one ain't. You get sorry for me. That's why I thought.
有冇唔會肚餓夜晚咁早食？你咁早食嘢？你食咗橙未？你個 lunch 嗰度有個橙㗎嘛？而家食埋佢。
And then you get questioned by government
Being held accountable.
being held accountable, which is not being held accountable. That even goes to the governor. You still get the government from the same
個
club.
波標咗。
Put the government in the book, and then you have to come to the community and explain yourself. Now, what other prison? You can't even see a governor with a normal prison to ask the
你
question.
揾得咩？
Never mind coming to it and they ask you to explain.
聽唔到講一聲。
In the point of sense,
Oh.
he went there to
可
play
能
the
會
role
賣。
of somebody who was really engaged in therapy and looked brilliant.
Yeah.
And then by actually playing that role and acting out those behaviours, the lo and behold, actually, you
但係
were
嗰個位
being
置唔
that
好
same person.
因為咧。嗰個位置咧係我哋一入嚟嗰陣時咧，如果夜晚嗰時候有車有燈㗎嘛，跟住嗰間屋嗰個 position 咧就啱啱入嚟嗰時啲車嗰啲燈咧就照住晒成間屋，就好光。你瞓覺嗰時咧就
chaired a meeting of the cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election.
I just been to see, I've actually seen the Queen earlier on, and she agreed to your Parliament an election.
Well, this is not an occasional company, this is a Downing Street president. Over there is Henry Zane, BBC's chief political correspondent. Henry, we're saying 5 o'clock, I can't see a lecture, what is going on?
It's very wet, and I think that explains it. It's so wet that I am standing under a massive golf umbrella, and yet somehow I'm really wet, and I'm not completely sure how that's happened, but I'm focusing on talking to you, and I'll work out the mechanics later. Yeah, I mean, we're told to expect the Prime Minister to appear outside 10 Downing Street at, well, any minute now, at about 5 o'clock. I think that probably is likely because of the weather to be pushed back a little bit, but the most important thing is what he's going to say. And what he's going to say is that he is calling a general election earlier than almost anybody expected, it's going to take place on July 4th, as you just indicated, and so he's firing the starting gun on what could be one of the most pivotal general election campaigns of some time.
Now, just talk us through the day, because people might have been listening to the Today programme this morning, had no inkling of this until the very end when Chris Mason came on and said, there's a lot to talk about in the election. And then through the day, we had a whole programme planned earlier this morning, and then through the day, it was just growing and growing, and by now it seems obvious that we've got July 4th as the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, Westminster runs on gossip at the best of times, but today it's absolutely crazy. It really has been something else. You mentioned Chris Mason, our colleague, just giving a little flavour at the very end of the day, no doubt, that something was up. Chris and I phones for hours beforehand, right after last night, and the most conspicuous thing that we could hear last night, I think it really was not here, was that
哥哥俾爸爸睇一睇先。
first speculation that we over recent months was no date for the general election. The worst speculation about the date setting in for the general election in May, for example. The second March, and we're quite there was round of speculation taking place then. Close to the centre, close to the heart, close to the damage towards Rishi Sunak's team. Rishi Sunak's team said to us that it's not going to happen. Quite the private program in the district. None of that is happening today. As the hours looked on, none of that still happened. I mean, Rishi Sunak letting the speculation run on very quickly at times to Westminster. It ultimately became clear, and that no election yeah, I mean, I think he was only there for a couple of hours, and there's photos of the streets of Iran wearing a number of photos of them. So, I mean, I guess it's possible that he would have told there after Rishi Sunak's announcement. I don't know, I'm just speculating. But given the news that came this Sunday, as an example, early this morning, the interview with making a sort of tentative argument that, oh, well, you know, the only reason that the cabinet is on Wednesday afternoon is some point in time because he's watching the morning the Prime Minister was in Vienna yesterday.
我睇呢隻咩？哇！佢睇睇個 cable 好勁啊！睇！cable 加啊！
some words in Downing Street that it was raining and my car had to drive round and round in order to make it a little bit. But look, there's no letter in Downing Street. I'm talking to Henry Zeppelin. Henry is wait, is it going to happen outside? They're not going to put it inside, are they? Put the Prime Minister inside and asking him to go in.
Not as far as I'm aware, if they are, there certainly isn't sign of that yet. I mean, not to turn myself into Carol Kirkwood, but it has recently broken up. By recently, I mean in the last 20 seconds or so. Perhaps that's a positive sign that we will get the announcement that we are now expecting. By the way, a few hours ago, that would be astonishing, but we are now expecting an announcement. General election will go through. Perhaps, well, it's still rather to get that within it.
Talk us through this moment with the Prime Minister, because as it became more and more obvious that this seemed to be coming, they didn't confirm. They like this moment, don't they? It's sort of the Prime Minister's golden period of control of the political agenda.
Yeah, although I'm not sure they would want the speculation to start quite as early as it did. I mean, bear in mind, they didn't particularly do anything to unleash the speculation. It was secret journalism from various organisations, including us, that sort of got the speculation rolling, and then it was the non-denials in response to that journalism which made clear that something really was up. But look, I mean, you're absolutely right. This is the moment of the Prime Minister's maximum prerogative power. It is entirely Rishi Sunak's prerogative when he wants the general election to be right up until that deadline, the end of January 2025. In January, this year, when we had a previous burst of speculation, he said the general election would be in the second half of the year. For so long, people have assumed that that meant the autumn, October, November, sometimes people suggested December. But, of course, July is the second half of the year. It's as early as it's possible to be in the second half of the year, but, you know, he's held true to that commitment.
What have you heard about the arguments? There was a cabinet meeting this afternoon. It doesn't seem to have been a very long one, really. I guess they're just getting formally notified of what the Prime Minister's thinking is. But what has been the argument about waiting or calling the election early?
Well, there's been arguments going on in Downing Street, Rishi Sunak's tight inner circle, for some time about when the election should be, and there has always been a camp, I'm told, almost among Oliver Dowden, Deputy Prime Minister, and perhaps Rishi Sunak's closest friend in elected politics, that has always argued that he should go early. And by early, that initially meant May, and now clearly it means July. And the argument that people like that have made was that yes, if Rishi Sunak waited, things might get better, by which they mean the economy might improve, interest rates might be cut, some fruits might take off for Rwanda, the polls might fudge. But equally, if they waited, things might get worse. And that was also the sort of pessimist camp.
Always that risk. And look, Henry, I'm going to leave you there. We'll talk to you later in the programme. I've got an eye on Downing Street. We don't know the cause of the delay. Maybe the weather. It's obviously been pretty rainy there. With me in the theatre, we've got Catherine Hackett from the Institute of Government, and also Michael Crick, the seasoned political journalist, we call him Michael, and he's just been on the media show across the corridor. We will cut into this conversation if you see a Prime Minister walking out of the hotel. But Catherine, can you just talk us through the procedure? What happens? An election is called, or a Prime Minister decides on it. What is the sort of, what are the steps that are
Yeah, I mean, this is it's totally the madness of it we've all been watching today. You can be rest assured that the entirety of Whitehall has also been sitting there looking at Twitter, listening to all the rumours and wondering what this means, as well as all of Parliament as well. Because for them, it's huge consequences, not just for MPs who now have to go back and try and get re-elected, but also because all of the business has to shut down. So for the next week or so, assuming that Parliament actually resolves next week, the July 4th election, they have to try and finish all of the government businesses, about 16 bills that they've got to finish up, including the finance bill for the budget, some other major bills that the government may have to drop and move the parts of to get through. And similarly, the government has to finish up a lot of work. The government continues through the election campaign, but there's lots of things they aren't allowed to do because it's a period of sensitivity. There's restrictions on what government activity can be.
And these civil servants, these are our servants. They're not innocent servants. What happens to the civil servants when the Prime Minister steps up?
Yeah, I mean, it's the core of why we have the civil service, the permanent, impartial officials carrying on to, change government if there is one, or to the next government. For them, they start to be able to do the proper preparation that they need to do, what the election result will be, and thinking through what does this mean, in terms of different election results, looking to a potential change, thinking about return to Conservative government, thinking about the potential of a hung Parliament, but they also have to keep everything ticking over. Ministers remain ministers, but obviously a lot of them will be out campaigning, especially those that are carrying on and wanting to win their seats, less so the Times.
When do the MPs stop doing anything?
They stop from the moment of dissolution. They are then candidates.
And they have to remove it from their bio in X, Twitter. They can't
exactly,
MPs.
And this is really important because it's even discussing today. Everyone has to remember we don't have a Parliament. So if you have a crisis or anything like that, you cannot recall Parliament. Parliament has ceased to exist. So we are purely governed by the executive. There is no Parliament.
Tell us about the King. Now, I mean, he has a role in this. He's not going to deny Prime Minister an election on an occasion like this. But what has the Prime Minister already cleared it with the King, or?
Well, we would expect to hear that. You heard in those speeches earlier on, most of them said, I have just been to see and have requested a dissolution, and that's the formal, proper way that you should do it, because it is actually the King that grants the dissolution, sets the date for the meeting of the new Parliament and so forth, and that determines when the election date is. So it would be interesting to see
see what Labour say. You have occasionally heard it discussed. I've decided on having a gender levy, which is
No.
but they will have already gone to Palace. We know that King Charles is in Buckingham Palace. There was a political audience was today, so whether or not the Prime Minister spoke to them and formally requested the dissolution, whether or not he's about to go off to the Palace, I guess we'll hear that from the final scene Prime Minister.
Michael Crick, one of the things you've been following more closely than any other person in the country, I think, is how the parties are filling the seats with their candidates for this upcoming election. And are they ready? They should be ready.
Yes, they're ready. I mean, they've got a few seats left. Basically, let's look at the ones they can realistically do. There's about 6 seats that Labour currently hold that they haven't filled. The Conservatives have got about 20 that they currently hold that they haven't filled. So you can do that. They've got plenty of time. I mean, I remember the 1964 election, which was barely 3 weeks long. This is going to be 6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks tomorrow.
And it's July 4th, and we've 6 weeks before. Now, of course, the parties like actually to have a late selection because it gives them the excuse to say, oh, we haven't got time to consult the members locally. You'll have to have so-and-so at your council. Which is complete rubbish, of course. You could hold a parliamentary selection in 48 hours, especially as well as you've done these days on Zoom and online. And also, the interesting to see the Labour time. Because I think some of the Labour times have been held back deliberately. Possibly, but they say, look, Joe, it's been very healthy with the party leader. We don't announce all the time just yet. Until the election team, we never know. And Blair was always doing that, he was right. So that enables the party leaders to install their people.
And we have had, very low dozens of Conservatives kind of thinking this is a moment to give it a rest and to take and to announce their departure. Oh, just let me interrupt to say the lectern is going so we are definitely informed that the lectern is going on, but that's not the Prime Minister.
The lectern does not have the Prime Minister's seal on it. This was always how you would tell because it's part of the political moment, so it doesn't have the government.
It doesn't have the seal, and I'm told 2 minutes is the kind of amount of time it takes from the lectern. The lectern guy I've got to do the broadcast. Henry, what are you seeing there in Dallas?
Yeah, the lectern has just gone out without the Prime Ministerial seal, as you were hearing there, which displays that this is a party political moment. This is the moment where Rishi Sunak will set out what he wants the arguments for the general election to be, what he sees as the crucial dividing line between the Conservatives and between Labour, but also in what I'm expecting to be a fairly presidential-style campaign between him and Sir Keir Starmer, because one of those 2 men will be Prime Minister on July the 5th. As polls stand, it's looking very good for the Labour Party, for Sir Keir Starmer. But elections can change. When Theresa May confounded us all by calling an election suddenly in 2017, things change very quickly, and Rishi Sunak will be desperate to find a way to force things to change as quickly as possible.
And Henry, where you're standing there is the infernal helicopter noise that is probably colleagues of ours up in the helicopter, where you don't actually get a very good view of the Prime Minister delivering his words in Downing Street, but it is the soundtrack now to all important Downing Street statements, basically.
Yes, it is. I don't have a particularly good view of the Prime Minister either. Not to let sunlight in upon magic, but there's so many umbrellas up that actually I've just glanced a little bit to my left and now I can see most of the front door.
I think you can probably see Lecton Guy, who has been much talked about on previous such occasions as Downing Street official, who puts out the lectern and is now having a starring TV moment as he talks to broadcasters to make sure everything is in place.
The Tottenham might tell its own story about the political tumult of the last few years, that people actually know the guy, the face of the guy who puts the lectern out in Downing Street. And, I think one of the things that Rishi Sunak has to do in this election is find a way to convince the public that actually some of that tumult, some of that chaos is going to stop. That, sure, there's just been a few years where the Conservatives have given the country 3 Prime Ministers, one of whom was only Prime Minister for 49 days. So he wants to find a way to argue for a full term for him in Downing Street, and that's going to be one of the really crucial tasks for him to try and carry off in this election.
Well, I think we are expecting for a minister in assessing that because the election is out and the lectern guy has cleared the lectern, which means the lectern is empty. I mean, in fairness, we've had a pretty tumultuous but Brenda Bristol can't say, oh, not another one. We have not had an election now for the UK for 4.5 years. This has been a pretty solid
Evan, Rishi Sunak.
Let us hear the Prime Minister.
In the last 5 years, our country has fought through the most challenging times since the Second World War. As I stand here as your Prime Minister, I can't help but reflect that my first proper introduction to you was just over 4 years ago. I stood behind one of the podiums upstairs in the building behind me. I told you that we faced a generation-defining moment and that we as a society would not be judged by some government action, but by the small acts of kindness that we showed one another. You met that challenge, and then some, and I have never been prouder to be British. And when I introduced the furlough scheme, I did so not because I saw a country simply in need of desperate help, albeit we were, but because I saw a country whose future hung in the balance. I could be bold and trust in the tens of millions of you at home that you would rise to the moment, or I could accept the inevitable millions of job losses and pick up the pieces. In truth, it was no choice at all. I have never and will never leave the people of this country to face the darkest of days alone.
Was that what prejudiced you? It seems at the time there was no coincidence there. The timer was very precise and intentional, but on the back of two big changes, and there may have been a third that we were hoping for to go on.
Norway, Spain and the Republic of Ireland are formally recognised Palestine as a state last week. The move has been welcomed by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, with the Palestine Liberation Organization calling it an historic moment. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel could not be given a state, adding that rewarding terrorism wouldn't bring peace.
So how was the dance then? Good. 做咩㗎你哋？你個老師唔同咗都 practice 乜嘢？ Oh, the flash mob.
Might not seem that important, but the decision by Norway, Spain and the Republic of Ireland to recognise
有冇人去呢個 flash mob 㗎咁嗰度？
only 9
唔係
European
有冇嚇？
most did so in
only 咩？
Norway's Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, said peace in the Middle East required a Palestinian state. Spain's Premier, Pedro Sanchez, said he hoped it would help secure a ceasefire. Ireland's Taoiseach, Simon Harris, said the Palestinians had a legitimate right to statehood.
It is a statement of unequivocal support for a two-state solution, the only credible path to peace and security for Israel, Palestine, and for their peoples.
Palestinian leaders welcomed the announcement. Hamas claimed it was prompted by what it called brave resistance. Israel's government was furious, saying the decision underlined sovereignty and security. It recalled its ambassadors from the three countries. Tal Haider was a spokesman for Israel's Prime Minister.
Today, Iowa, Norway, and Spain are basically telling Hamas and people who support them and people who are inspired by them. I'm not talking just about Gaza, but around the world, by the way, that the October 7th massacre pays off. The terrorism pays off. And what are they telling Palestinians? They're telling Palestinians that educating children to terrorism and refusing to accept a Jewish state pays off.
The Irish and Spanish and Norwegian decision will put some pressure on other European countries to follow suit, but many, including the United States, believe this is too early, that recognising a Palestinian state should come later to drive momentum towards a long-term political settlement. There are also many unanswered questions about where the borders and capital of any Palestinian state may lie. So the diplomatic dial shifted with some symbolic declarations, but the reality on the ground is unlikely to change.
Doctors in Thailand say that 20 passengers are in intensive care after a flight from London to Singapore experienced extreme turbulence. The Singapore Airlines plane made an emergency landing in Bangkok. One of the passengers, Jen Kitchen, 73, and Jersey has taken another step towards legalising assisted dying in certain cases. Members of the island's state assembly voted this afternoon by 32 to 14 in favour of drafting legislation. The final decision in 18 months' time. Our medical Davis Walsh reports.
Under the proposals, assisted dying will be open to terminally ill adults with mental capacity who have lived on the island for at least a year. They must have a life expectancy of less than 6 months or 12 months where they have a neurological condition like Parkinson's or motor neuron disease. The politicians voted by 27 to 19 against making it open to those who are not dying but face unbearable suffering due to an incurable physical condition. Critics say assisted dying will place disabled or vulnerable people in jeopardy and lead to coercion. A bill to permit assisted dying for the terminally ill has already been introduced in the Isle of Man Parliament, and in Scotland, a private member's bill has been introduced at Holyrood.
The Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service have said that no criminal charges will be brought in the Grenfell Tower disaster until the end of 2026 at the earliest. They said the increasing scale and complexity of the public inquiry meant that new decisions would be required to be considered. 19 companies or organisations and 58 individuals are under investigation following the fire in West London, which killed 72 people. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
7 years after the fire, the bereaved and survivors say getting justice is their priority, but it has been further delayed. Police are legally obliged to consider the final findings of the Grenfell Tower public inquiry, due this summer or autumn. That will take 12 to 18 months. Then the Crown Prosecution Service will have to decide whether charges are justified, expected at the end of 2026, making it highly likely court proceedings will start in 2027, 10 years after the fire. Many companies and organisations were involved with the disastrous refurbishment of the tower, which created a risk of a fast-spreading fire. Possible charges range from breaches of health and safety to corporate manslaughter.
A nursery nurse from Stockport has been jailed for 14 years for the manslaughter of a 9-month-old girl who she strapped face down on a beanbag for more than 90 minutes. Manchester Crown Court was told that Kate Ruffley, who is 37, had punished Regan for not sleeping long enough. She died as a result of asphyxiation at the Tiny Toes nursery in Cheadle Hulme near Stockport in May 2022. In the city, the 100 share index ended the day down 46 points at 2,370. On Wall Street, a short time ago, the Dow Jones was down 55 points at 39,818. Currency markets, the pound is trading at $1 at 27.4, and against the euro, sterling is at €1.17.5, makes a euro worth 85.1 pence. People are being encouraged to make their households self-sufficient by stocking up on essential items such as water, tin food, and batteries in case of emergency. The Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, has launched a new government website with advice. The measures are part of wider plans to boost national resilience.
Tin meat and vegetables, a wind-up radio and bottled water. Some of the items the government is advising households to stock up on in case of an emergency. Supplies, it says, that could last for a few days. The risks that ministers want people to prepare for include flooding, power cuts, cyber attacks, or another pandemic. A first aid kit and a tin opener are also on the checklist, which also says, don't forget food for pets. This sounds very much like this 1970s public information campaign in case of a nuclear threat.
Here is a list of the most important things you really want. Closely intended.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, launched the new government website with the advice. It says the measures are not about stockpiling, rather sensible safeguards. Retailers have urged people not to panic buy. British Retail Consortium said most households would already have sufficient non-perishables sitting in the cupboard. Mr. Dowden insists the measures are part of wider plans to bolster national resilience. To bring the UK in line with other countries like Finland and Japan that have similar initiatives.
The British Olympic swimming champion David Hockey has died of cancer at the age of 70. won his first major medal representing Scotland at the Commonwealth Games in 1970. Wilkie went on to win 3 world titles and 2 Olympic silvers. His career culminated with gold in the 200 metres breaststroke at the Montreal Games in 1976, being broke the existing world record by more than 2 seconds. 2 uncapped footballers with all his name and Prosper Corey, Bristol City, that were included in Scotland's provisional 28-man squad for Euro 2024. The Celtic winger James Forrest had a source of Burnley Cork, who was 3 years after his last international games. The squad would have top 26 players and another. Now we return to our main story, the news that Rishi Sunak has called a general election for July the 4th. The last general election took place on Thursday the 12th of December 2019. The then Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said it was time for the country to come together to get Brexit done. As the clock struck 10 on polling day, the result of an exit poll was announced on BBC One.
Our exit poll is suggesting that there will be a Conservative majority when all the votes counted after this election of December 2019.
Conservatives under Mr Johnson finished with 365 seats, a majority of 80. Jeremy Corbyn led Labour to its worst result of the general election since 1935, winning with 200 seats. The UK formally left the European Union on the 31st of January 2020. Nigel Farage, who was Brexit Party leader, addressed a rally in Parliament Square in central London.
We should celebrate the fact that free from the constraints of the European Union, we once again will be able to find our place in the world.
2 days earlier, the UK had its first confirmed case of COVID-19. The virus soon come to dominate the government. On the evening of the 23rd of March 2020, the Prime Minister gave a televised address to the nation.
The time has now come for us all to reform. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Boris Johnson contracted COVID in April 2020. He was admitted to hospital and spent a period in intensive care. A year later, he was fined by the police for breaking lockdown rules in Downing Street. The fine was part of what became known as Partygate, one of the public scandals that led to the resignation of Mr Johnson as Prime Minister in 2022.
I'm now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific. And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my craft.
Conservative leadership race saw the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss defeat the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak by about 21,000 votes to replace Mr Johnson. She took office on the 6th of September 2022. Later that month, Truss's Chancellor, Russell Kwarteng, announced £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts in what was called a mini budget. The plans triggered turmoil in the markets, and Kwarteng was sacked after just 38 days in office. Liz Truss lasted just 7 days more. Her 45-day premiership making her the shortest serving Prime Minister in UK history.
We set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party.
Truss's departure saw Rishi Sunak become Prime Minister.
It is the greatest privilege of my life to be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to.
As the third person to hold the title in 2 months, his Conservative Party is now defending a Commons majority that has been whittled down to 38. With his thoughts on the general election announcement, here's our political editor, Chris Mason, from Downing Street.
Campaigners' music in nearby Whitehall blaring, the rain pouring, and Rishi Sunak stands at the lectern in Downing Street, this the country's most powerful address, until a day like this, when that power drains away, and he's due to decide whether he still lives here in the second week of July or not. His address appealed to his record and makes known he would act as a careful, scrupulous custodian in the most difficult of times, pandemic, political, and international. The message from Labour, just a single word, change. It is so often the most powerful word in politics. That change is considered palatable. Labour's hope after 14 years of Conservative or Conservative-led government is that this can be that moment. But for all the noise, punditry and polling, that could be your call as a flotilla of arguments and persuasion begins. The Scottish National Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, Reform UK, Plaid Cymru and Northern Ireland parties. Their case for your vote begins now.
Chris Mason, BBC News, presented by Charles Cowell. Let's change gear now on Radio 4. First broadcast in 2022 from the second part of the Angus comedian Tia Owens' story about an unexpectedly international series of events on his childhood family farm.
In 1978, I was 11 years old and I was going to be a farmer because I was a farmer's son and also because, that's the only because there is. My father was a farmer, as was his father before him, and so on. I did have choices, of course I did. It wasn't the dark ages. I could choose to be a sheep farmer, I could choose to be a cattle farmer, or I could choose to be a sheep and cattle farmer. My life's path resembled a country lane with really ancient tall hedges on either side. But a few extraordinary weeks in 1978 changed everything. By the middle of the summer, Hector, the geology student who was staying in our attic, had had enough. He was in the kitchen talking to my mother and was angry.
I'm not angry, Mrs. Erling.
He sounded angry.
I'm just rather annoyed.
That's a bit of being angry.
When the university recommended your farmhouse, I hadn't realised
Go.